screens and, reverses and kind of all those things. It's kind of, we got to get the ball you got to have 11 guys that are, just getting after, and, just some of them, I think, collectively, we just need to be better at it.
That was Broncos linebacker Alex Singleton talking about the ways in which Denver's defense has to start coming together after 2 subpar weeks in which they have not been able to close the deal on that side of the football. And now they enter their toughest test of the season, a Miami Dolphins offense that is 2-0 and absolutely rolling with Tua Tagovailoa and with Tyreek Hill. That is the challenge for the Broncos as they take to the road for the first time here in week 3. I'm Nick Kosmider, host of the Not Another Bucking podcast. We thank you guys for joining us, watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcasts. Please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, let us know what you think. Appreciate all the support for the podcast so far. Really excited today to have our guest, an old friend of mine, Cameron Wolfe, who used to work in Denver early in his career as a reporter at the Denver Post covering the Broncos. He's worked for ESPN and now is at the NFL Network. Does great work there and is based in South Florida, so it spends a lot of time covering the Dolphins, and he will be part of the NFL Network's coverage this week leading up to Broncos Dolphins there in week 3. So before we get to that conversation with Cam, I just wanted to kind of go through a couple of thoughts that I have early this week, coming off Denver's 35-33 loss to the Commanders in week 2. You go through and you dissect some of the numbers, each week in each of these little checkpoints to see, where the team is at. And I think one thing that is encouraging if you are a Broncos fan is that Denver is leading the league right now in points per drive, 2.89 points per drive. It's a better barometer than saying, than looking at points per game, simply because it's a measure of sort of drive to drive efficiency for a team. And right now the Broncos are moving the ball at a rate that is as good as anybody in the league in general. And so you can't do that. You can't reach that, level through 2 games without doing some good things offensively. And Sunday, any way you slice it, scoring 3 touchdowns in a span of 17 plays, the Broncos haven't done that in more than a decade. So there are good things that you are seeing from this offense that despite the 0-2 record give you hope. The discouraging part, again, and talking to Sean Payton on Monday, was the lack of cohesiveness with the play calling operation. It was causing the Broncos to burn timeouts in the first half. It was causing them to really kind of slowly move along on an important fourth quarter drive that really put them behind the 8 ball in terms of trying to chase 2 scores. And again, a lot of the things that we saw last year, we thought were relatively cleaned up. Pretty clean operation in week 1 from a tempo and play calling perspective, and then took sort of a step backward in week 2. So Sean Payton has promised a few things, or at least suggested a few things that could be in the works for changes. One would be, reducing the verbiage. So maybe having fewer play calls into the game plan, potentially using a wristband for some of the longer play calls that they will still have in the game plan for Russell Wilson in order to, again, expedite that process. So it's going to be something to certainly keep an eye on, is can they kind of keep up with this tempo that they're going to need to have in order to put Miami's defense on its heels. The other thing too is the running game. Coming out of that game, you look and you see that Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine combined for 13 carries, and to me that's just not enough in a game in which you led 21-3. There were ample opportunities to continue that sort of run the ball setting tone that they just never really got to. And things went haywire fast in that game. The Broncos were up 21-3. Marvin Mims gives you a great punt return that puts you at midfield. The Broncos do go to the run. They get a 5-yard run on first down from Javonte Williams. You're moving. You're saying they're gonna go down and make this game 28-3. He gets a 7-yard run to pick up a would-be first down, but Ben Powers gets a holding call. On the very next play, Russell Wilson fumbles the ball. Washington takes over, goes down, scores a touchdown, gets the 2-point conversion, and it's now 21-11. The Broncos, on their next drive, go 3 and out. And to start the third quarter, now only leading by a touchdown, get sacked on a 1st and 10 play, get sacked for 9 yards, and now that drive is pretty much already poisoned. So they just sort of had this opportunity that just really went away quickly to establish this run game. And the result of that was in the second half, the Washington just being able to kind of pick their spots to really just pin their ears back and go after Russell Wilson. The result was 7 sacks. I believe 5 of those came in the second half. So that is really the area of opportunity that they have to, whether they're tied, whether they're ahead, whether they're even just down a score, is to not let themselves get away from this run game. That has to be their identity if they want to protect Russell Wilson far better than they did last week. Defensively, we'll get to it with Cameron here in a minute. The test is phenomenal with this Miami Dolphins offense. Tyreek Hill is arguably the best non-quarterback player in the league. Maybe the best player in the league. He's on pace for 2,700 yards and 26 touchdowns. It's fun to play with those on pace numbers here early in the season, but he is a guy that is absolutely dynamic. And that offense ran the ball a lot better against the Patriots in that week 2 win on the road on Monday Night Football. This is a pretty balanced and complete team, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And Denver's defense, which is dealing with injuries, which has had trouble in the red zone, which is having trouble, stopping screen plays, have a lot to figure out against a Dolphins team that is going to exploit every weakness that they potentially have. So huge game for that side of the ball to show that these first 2 weeks they can make a jump from. So we'll be really keeping our eye closely on that as the week goes on. So let's now get into our conversation with Cameron Wolfe. But first, I want to play a clip of Lloyd Cushenberry talking a little bit more about the need for better communication in the play calling operation for the Broncos.
I don't think that'll be a huge problem for us moving forward. We had a few times during the game. There was some problems getting in and out of the huddle, and that's when all of us as players and all the coaches been on the same page, communicating, getting the personnel in and out fast enough. So all 11 on the field and everyone involved in the sideline, guys have to be better, when it comes to communicating in that phase.
All right, now a warm welcome in to our guest this week on Not Another Bucking Podcast. It's Cameron Wolfe of the NFL Network, former Denver Post reporter covering the Broncos out here in Denver, former ESPN reporter covering the Dolphins, and has certainly been around that team for several years now. Cam, thanks so much, man. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. Great to be on, man. It's a reunion week for me. I started my career in Denver and hanging with Nick, and so we bring it all full circle. This is actually the first Broncos game that I've covered since I covered the team. So
is it really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, obviously James Palmer lives out here, so he ends up doing a lot of the stuff. We see him around, but reunion, I think, is sort of the a great word for this game, right? Like Mike McDaniel, Colorado kid, grew up out here. Was a Broncos ball boy. Vic Fangio coached the team for 3 years. Bradley Chubb got traded to Miami last year. A lot of great sort of reunion connections in this game.
Yeah, man, you hit it on the nose. It's going to be interesting to see how much the emotions, the ties, the connections have a factor in this game. And you mentioned Mike McDaniel for the ball boy story, and he'll probably talk about that today. But I'm eager to see the Vic Fangio connection, obviously, because he was the head coach there. It didn't go so great, and like any guy, when you get fired somewhere, I'm sure he has a little extra chip on the shoulder to prove that they were wrong. And so that's going to be fun. They have an offensive line coach in Butch Berry, who had a very rough ending in Denver as well. And he's had a good start through 2 games in Miami. So a lot of different fun connections here. It's also a very important game for the Broncos at 0-2, who need to win and against a red hot Dolphins team that's been 2-0 and flying all over the place. And so I think it's going to be a fun matchup. I think the Broncos will give them a better challenge than maybe people expect.
Yeah, well, let's start there with Vic Fangio. You mentioned 3 years from 2019 through 2021. Got fired after the 2021 season, in which they were 7-10, but they were in the playoff mix. They were 7-6. Teddy Bridgewater ends up getting hurt. They lose their last 4 games, miss the playoffs. He gets fired. They bring in Nathaniel Hackett. We know that goes very poorly in the 1 year. Russell Wilson's first year as well. Bottom line is the Broncos are 5-14 since they fired Vic Fangio. And he took the year out just like Sean Payton did.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you've seen, Cam, from how he has sort of started the foundation of that defense that has some talent, but certainly needed to improve this year. What can you just say about Vic's overall impact with that unit and how they're starting to kind of coalesce with a scheme that is complicated when you're first installing it?
Absolutely, Nick. So it was interesting. I spent a lot of time with him in training camp, and you can tell immediately that this is a Vic Fangio defense. Last year I was watching the same team in camp, and the offense was treading up and down the field with ease, which they do against most teams. And this year that was not the case. The defensive front was getting a lot more pressure, and the sort of the tempo of the Vic Fangio defense was seen early because they would show you completely different things pre-snap than they would show post-snap. And so you could already tell. And then players started to gel with him because it takes some time. He's an old school guy. It can be a little bit of gruff, but I started to talk to some of the guys about his humor or lack of humor in their perspective and just sort of his impact. And so I was actually surprised week 1 when they came out and really laid an egg against the Chargers. Chargers went up and down the field, particularly on the run game against them. And then week 2 against the Patriots, they looked a lot more like what I expected them to look like, shutting down New England. And so you hope that it was more of a one-game aberration the Dolphins do week 1, and that week 2 is more, representative to who he is. But I think the key thing for this Dolphins team is they've always been in the Brian Flores era, a blitz-heavy, man-heavy team. We've seen them over the last few months, and particularly the first 2 weeks, shift more to a zone coverage scheme and use more of their front to get home. And so that's definitely all Vic Fangio.
Yeah, I was looking at those numbers this morning, and I think they're down somewhere around 22nd, 21st in blitz rate, where usually the last few years
top 3,
top 5, and yet they're
Yeah.
still getting the pressure, top 10 in pressure rate because those front 4. And it's been a lot of guys. I think 6 different guys have already accumulated a sack for the Dolphins. But I'm curious about Bradley Chubb, right? It's when you talk about that connection, drafted number 5 overall by the Broncos in 2018, had that great rookie year, then tore his ACL, came back, made the Pro Bowl in 2020, then had some more injuries that he dealt with, was playing really well in 2022. And that's part of the reason that the Dolphins wanted him and that they were willing to give away that first-round pick, which the Broncos turned around and used to be able to hire Sean Payton. Might not have been able to do that had they not had that pick. So it's kind of wild how these things come around. But Chubb, obviously, I think probably struggled a little bit in this when he got to Miami last year. It's the first time he had been traded, a completely different scheme. How would you assess where he's sort of come along, and whether he was eager to have Vic back, calling the defense that he was in?
Absolutely. So there was a very interesting period last season where Bradley Chubb just wasn't playing well, and you started to wonder, did they make a mistake? But then you bring in a Vic Fangio and a guy who, although he didn't spend much time with him, Bradley Chubb was hurt most of the time he was there, knows him and knows the way he wants to play. And I'll tell you what, the last couple of weeks of training camp, I saw him play the best I've seen him play in a Dolphins uniform. And it hasn't translated to big sacks yet in the season, but I anticipate the pairing of he and Jalen Phillips, who's the other young edge rusher on the other side, to be a really, really good pairing for Vic Fangio, and the reason why they won't have to blitz as much. Bradley Chubb's not going to be your 15-sack guy. He hasn't shown that yet throughout his career, but you want him to be the consistent 8 to 10 sack guy, a guy who can set the edge, a guy who can bring pressure. And they think he can be that guy. And so Bradley Chubb has handled it well. It's been interesting watching him this offseason and how he's built more relationships with some of the guys in the locker room, particularly Jalen Phillips, because you mentioned it. You get traded midseason, and there's no excuses, but it's tough. You've always been in Denver. You start over in a new city, a team that needs you on the fly, and a scheme that you're not completely familiar with. And I don't know if he ever felt at home yet. This offseason, I think he felt more at home. He felt more in his zone, and it's going to be interesting to see him go against a couple of his former guys.
It probably doesn't help that, or just from sort of the getting comfortable standpoint, is you go over there and they give you the contract right away. So now it's just like, not only do we give
pressure.
Yes. So it just sort of ramps up right away. But obviously he had the great forced fumble against the Patriots, had a sack as well. Want to switch it over to the offensive side of the football. And, Mike McDaniel is a guy that I think in that first year, having Tyreek Hill in that offense last year, they kind of took the league by storm. We're doing just a lot of really impressive things with the way they moved guys around. Now defenses had the offseason to kind of study for him, but it already seems like in these first 2 weeks, Mike McDaniel has introduced all kinds of new things. What's been the biggest difference that you've seen being there all the time in this offense? I know it's still early in 2023, but versus kind of what they were doing a little bit last year.
Great question. They've evolved. That's the biggest thing to me. You mentioned the motion. They run motion more than any team in the league. And Tyreek Hill in motion, especially the way he runs towards the line of scrimmage, almost feels like it's unfair, given what his skill set is. But what's interesting is all offseason teams have had a chance to watch what the Dolphins did. And I talked to coaches throughout the league who essentially said that they felt like they would catch up to some of the stuff McDaniel was doing as far as speed, as far as moving guys over the middle of the field. The Dolphins love to run the ball, love to pass the ball over the middle of the field. Tua gets the ball out with quick anticipation, right? And so you saw week one, the Chargers team, a team that had success against them last year, try to do some of those same game plans where they say, hey, we're going to shade our corners inside to jump some of those inside slant routes that Tua loves to throw. And the Dolphins torched them. They adjusted. They found a way. They put some wheel routes on the backside of those slant routes to kind of give them some options. And Tua, several times in that game, when his first read wasn't there, when his timing was taken off the track, adjusted. And he made that play that was kind of on a highlight reel over and over throughout the week where his receiver fell down. He steps up into the pocket, throws a 47-yard pass to Tyreek Hill on 3rd and 10 to essentially lead in that go-ahead touchdown. So that was the first step. And then this past week, we saw the Patriots do a lot of 3 deep safeties and say, we're going to take away Tyreek Hill. He went for 215 yards. We're going to take away 1 explosive plays, 2 Tyreek Hill, and 3 in the middle of the field. And the Patriots had more success than any team probably since the Chargers last year. Tyreek Hill had 40 yards. They didn't have anything deep in the passing game. And the middle of the field was pretty much shut down. And Tua adjusted. McDaniel adjusted. He threw the ball outside the numbers, which is something that people say Tua can't do. And so to me, the evolution of this team, and the other thing, they went to the running game. Raheem Mostert had an amazing day too, right? And so the thing for this team is if you evolve when teams take away your best players and your best plays, I think that makes you a more dangerous team, a true contender. And at times last year, they didn't evolve. The biggest difference so far this year is their ability to adjust.
And you mentioned the run game. Like Raheem Mostert had the two touchdown runs, and they've used a lot of different backs going into his tenure there. Mike McDaniel came over as the run game coordinator from San Francisco, who just really kind of revolutionized a lot of the way. I've even seen it some with the Broncos now. This sort of the inside toss play where you have the whole defense taking that step outside, but then that toss comes right back in the middle. He kind of championed that a lot when he was in San Francisco. Where to me that seems like the next evolution for Miami's offense is really getting that to click along with everything else. Is that part of the success that they've had in the first 2 weeks?
Absolutely. That was the biggest criticism from Dolphins fans of the offense in year one. That the running game, that Mike McDaniel, his baby, essentially was non-existent. And the biggest thing he said was it was less the running backs and more the opportunity. They were 31st in attempts, which essentially means that Mike McDaniel, like probably many of us if we were a coach, fell in love with throwing the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, probably more than he wanted to. But again, it's easy for me to forgive him because I watch Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on a regular basis.
Right.
But they just did not run the ball frequently. And they were actually middle of the pack as far as efficiency, bottom of the league as far as attempts. And he promised the running back that they would run the ball more this year. And we saw it last game when teams say, hey, we're going to take away certain elements, particularly Tyreek. Can you be able to run the ball? Raheem Mostert had a great day, and I think he's going to continue to be the guy they lean on. It's interesting with Raheem because, we're in a fantasy football society, and people kind of turn their nose up at Raheem because he's 31 years old. He's always hurt or has an injury history. It's like, how can you trust this dude? And it's no secret the Dolphins, flirted with Jonathan Taylor. They flirted with Dalvin Cook. They flirted with a lot of different running backs. And so it's like, how can you trust that he will lead your running game? Well, they do. And he has been the guy. He was the guy last week, and he'll be the guy this week. And so I do anticipate the Dolphins saying, hey, if you're going to do the Patriots plan, if you're going to say we're going to take away Tyreek, we're going to run Raheem. If you're going to say we're going to take away Raheem, we're going to run Tyreek. And so that's what makes them dangerous because once you have 2 or 3 different options, and really 3, then it becomes hard for defenses to pick and choose going forward. So I do think that run game will continue to be a factor there. And keep an eye on Devon Achane, their rookie running back. He'll move up to the number 2 role with Salvin Ahmed injured and probably not playing this week. He has another level speed and pass catching ability too that should add another element to this offense.
And then about the injuries, we know that Jalen Waddle's in the concussion protocol. What about Teron Armstead and tip of my tongue. Oh, Jalen Phillips, who we were talking about earlier. Likelihood that those two will be back in week 3?
I think there's a good likelihood. Both of those guys did pregame workouts against the Patriots, and they were close, but the team wanted to hold them out of precaution. Teron Armstead in particular, he's a guy who has been hurt a lot throughout his career, and the goal for him is usually to get to the end of the season. He's been dealing with several injuries, and so the goal for him is to get closer to 100%. He wasn't there yet, and so they're going to give him another week. Jalen Phillips was actually pretty upset. He thought he should be able to go. They, again, wanted to hold him out, and it worked out because they won the game. So I think you see both of these guys practice maybe as early as today, but definitely some point this week. And I think they'll both have a decent chance to go, barring any setbacks. Jalen Waddle, obviously, we'll keep an eye on. Concussion protocol is what it is, so we'll see how he goes through the concussion protocol.
And probably certainly not thrilling for the Broncos to hear that Jalen Phillips could be back, given that they just gave up 7 sacks to Russell Wilson. It's been continuing to be the huge problem. They jumped out 21-3 because they were able to dictate the tone of the game. They ran the football. They worked off play action. And Russell was able to, in that setting, he is still as dangerous. But when they started losing the lead, even had the Commanders go ahead, it put the Broncos in a situation where, defense and that really good front line for Washington was able to pin its ears back and get after him. I'm just curious, Cam, your sort of view from afar of this team that used to cover back when they were kind of first starting this slide. And as you're kind of getting ready, to help NFL Network's coverage of this game, what is just sort of the things that are intriguing to you, or that you will have your eye on from a Broncos perspective this week?
Yeah, just like everybody, I want to see Russell Wilson's continued growth with Sean Payton. I think that's a storyline we talked about a lot this offseason, whether I was on morning shows like Good Morning Football or just in general. We're trying to see how can Sean Payton fix Russell Wilson. And one thing I've noticed, and you can tell me you're closer to it, but I do think that he has been better so far than what he was last year. The 0-2 record kind of clouds things. But when I watched them on tape, they were not as undisciplined and bad as I thought they were given their record. They actually were right in that game. You could argue they should have won that game before the Commanders came back. But I think Sean Payton mentioned it. It still looks like there's a little bit of a chemistry that has to come together, whether it be what Sean Payton mentioned, simplifying the playbook a little bit, or how do we balance the let Russ cook versus this is Sean Payton's offense. That's something that I can tell they're still working through. But I saw glimpses of the old Russ, which I did not see much of at all. And I'm eager to see what they do this week, because the Dolphins defense does have an improved pressure, but they have some holes on that defense. And we saw them in week 1 give up a lot in the running game. I'm curious how Javonte Williams kind of goes about in that run game. We haven't seen a huge jump from him yet, but as he gets healthier throughout the season, I'd imagine we see a little bit more of his old style. And then I do think that they can have some exploiting of this pass D. Xavier Howard has been a really good corner for a while, but he can get beat at times. And Eli Apple has been really targeted a bunch from teams early on. He's their other outside corner when they go into 3 wide. And so there's some opportunities, I'd imagine, for Russ to get the ball to Jerry Jeudy, to Cortland Sutton, to Marvin Mims, some guys down the field to be able to get some plays. So I think they can actually score on this defense. I don't know if they can stop the other side, though.
Yeah, that's going to be the question mark, which is kind of has been sort of a disappointment for a lot of Broncos fans so far, because you're right that Russell Wilson and that offense, they have been better. They're actually leading the league in points per drive right now, which is, given what this offense was last year, it's crazy. Absolutely. They scored 6 touchdowns. Took them 5 weeks to get to that mark in 2022. So the offense is doing some good things. And I think if you're the glass half full thing is saying, hey, this is just 2 weeks in, they're clearly have some more explosive capability, but you turn it around the other end, and this defense that was really, really good last year, at least for the first half of the season, has really struggled so far. And part of it is they haven't been able to get that base pressure. Vance Joseph has had to blitz a lot, and that's really the only way that they can get home, and that's left them susceptible to the explosive play. That's about the worst kind of situation you could have going into this kind of offense. If they don't get that pressure with the front four and you're having to blitz a lot, you're kind of leaving yourself susceptible. So that to me is going to be, from a Broncos perspective, like, can guys like Randy Gregory, Nick Bonito get home a little bit more frequently? Zach Allen, their interior pass rusher, I think they need to see a little bit more from him. But I agree with you. I think there's going to be shots for the Broncos to get in it, but their whole thing is if they get behind, if they're not in the driver's seat or at least kind of neck and neck, it gets to be a situation where they have a hard time protecting when they're a pass only team. So that'll be the interesting thing.
That makes a lot of sense. This offense is hard to stop early. It's hard to stop late. And so the one thing that defenses have had so much trouble with Tua is that it's not so much that the offensive line has been great. They've been good. They haven't been great. The Dolphins I'm speaking to. Tua just gets the ball out of his hands so quick. And I read a stat this week, yesterday, that I think sums it up. He leads the NFL as far as the quickest time to throw. Mm-hmm. But he also leads the NFL in yards per attempt downfield.
Yeah.
So you're getting the ball out more quicker than any other quarterback, but you're also throwing it deeper than any other quarterback. And so you don't
throw deep.
Is that thing? I don't know. These are just what the numbers say. And so those things don't necessarily coincide, but it also makes it difficult for any defense, particularly one that struggles to get home quickly.
Yeah, well, good stuff. Well, Cameron, man, we can't wait to see you out in Miami this weekend. Really appreciate you coming on Not Another Bucking podcast. People can find your work on Twitter at NFL Network. You're everywhere, man. Love seeing you. Love seeing you do your thing. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate you, Nick.
All right. Thanks everybody to listening. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, let us know what you think, and we'll see you after the game Sunday night.